Welcome to the arrivals at the end of leg 3 of the Ocean Race Europe, and there are two last IMOCA 60s yet to come in. Joining me is Abby Ehler, and Abby, it's going to be Bureau next to finish. It's going to be Coram to finish after that, and unfortunately for these two teams, realistically, the points that they're scoring here on the water, they don't amount to an awful lot of difference on the scoreboard.
Yeah, I think as we were discussing just before we came on, that the scoreboard is pretty much set, and the results that are going to come in now from Bureau and Coram are not going to change anything, but hopefully they've had a great leg. It's certainly been a tough competition and very tight racing throughout.
And again, you know, it could have been very, very different. I mean, for Bureau and Coram, I mean, at one point it looked like it was going to be linked out, was going to be the last IMOCA 60 to get in, while these two teams were further up to the north, and it all sort of seemed to change on a bit of a dime. Wasn't that long ago when we were on air covering the VO65s, and this was a group of 4 IMOCA 60s very tight together, but there we've got pictures of Bureau coming into the finish line, and Pip Hare on board. And just before they get to the finish here, Abby, I mean, Pip's a very interesting character in terms of what she has done in the Vendée Globe, and she managed to sail the course and complete in a old generation boat. But here she is sailing with this team, learning how to grapple with foils. So performance on the water, results on the scoreboard, that's one thing. But in terms of miles gained and lessons learned, I'm sure there'll be plenty of those.
Indeed. I mean, you've got to remember this is not a one design per se. You know, there's so many differences in hull shape, in foil shape, in sail design between the boats. So it's never going to be a clear-cut, you know, race that comes down to crew. And in terms of the Pip in particular, it was fantastic to see just how excited she was to be sailing on one of these IMOCA with foils. She'd obviously sailed around the world in the Vendée on a boat that didn't have foils, and just to see her reports coming off the boat and how elated she was at just the performance, yeah, she's got that to look forward to for her next Vendée Globe campaign.
And that next Vendée Globe campaign will be on the old Bureau, so who better to learn from than Louis Bertin, the skipper of Bureau that we can see there in the white glasses just on the helm. And it's a similar picture, isn't it, to what we've been seeing this afternoon here of, well, the challenges remain, the light winds remain, but the breeze has been slowly sort of tracking round to the right. And just looking at the track that this boat has been doing, they're now on starboard coming into the finish. I mean, I think they've been having to jibe downwind into the finish, and what a difference that's been from what the VO65s had to do a few hours before.
Yeah, I think we've almost seen every direction from east to west out of the north through our time on air through the night. So it's really been a fickle breeze, and the direction, as we said, have just been so variable. Yeah, it's really hard to say what breeze they're in now, whether this is just a gradient that's built throughout the afternoon and into the evening. But luckily they're still in the breeze, managing to truck towards the finish line, and hopefully this is going to hold and get them across quickly.
Yeah, they did have a period where, I mean, they were fairly becalmed. I mean, it was something around about 20 minutes, 30 minutes ago, their speed pretty much halted, whereas perhaps what happened then was maybe the beginnings of the thermal, but certainly something that was blowing onto the shore, which has put them onto this downwind course, and now we can see them jibing around. And you know, they haven't crossed the finish line yet, so we've just got a few moments to talk a little bit about this. But it's been interesting following the IMOCA 60s and seeing how different each boat is, and how well Bureau does seem to get those foils up out of the water when they're not needing to be used. The boat is bolt upright, and the foils are maybe just tickling the waves slightly. The majority of them isn't causing any drag.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic, isn't it? I think what Charlie Enright summed it up quite well with a quote. He said, "It's like having a Ferrari and we're driving it in a parking lot." I mean, these boats just want to be lit up. They want to go fast. And this is just, you know, it's like an animal in a cage at the moment, dying to get out and show what it's really made of. But yeah, it's difficult. There's certainly not ideal conditions for this shape of hull. And like you said, you know, the foils are not even in use. So far from ideal, but we've certainly seen some great sailing on that first leg down to the turning mark, just the Tabarca just after the start. And I believe when they went through the islands of the Balearics, they had some really good upwind fast sailing. So it hasn't all been dull.
No, and I think you're absolutely right to point that out. That, I mean, there is no secret here. These boats have stacked all of their chips into just one area, which is that sort of 110 degrees true reaching angle. That's where the foils come in. That's where the hull comes into its own, and that's where the boat really powers up. These sorts of light wind, downwind, light wind, upwind, that's where the boats really suffer. So, you know, they've taken performance out of those areas and they've tweaked the boat for a very narrow range. But, you know, that might be a bit of an error, and there certainly might be people thinking, well, hang on a minute, if I'm going to sail the IMOCA 60 in events like this, I'm going to need to start widening what it can do. However, as we have seen, when it is in its element, it is significantly faster than just about everything else that we've seen on the water. Well, Bureau Valet just going through a jibe there, so we are doing these difficult downwind jibes, but the good news is they are making good progress. About 5 knots, 6. I mean, we saw 7 just a few moments ago as they're coming into the finish line, and the conditions easy enough just to sort of swan around on deck and pull the code 0 round from one side to the other pretty much by hand. And this has been a very, very long leg for all of the teams, and for Bureau Valet and Coram coming in now. I mean, it has been a huge distance to go over. I'm hoping that we just have time before they go through the finish line. We're just going to quickly go to the tracker because I just want to show you how far ahead they are from Coram and what breeze or what speed Coram is producing behind. So you can see how much their track has changed, and when it turned into that sort of downwind jibing, Coram behind them, I mean, they are really in the light wind at the moment, and their course hasn't been affected. They haven't had to jibe or tack yet, so that could be the transition of the wind for that final French team. We will have to wait and see, but whatever happens, the final few miles for every single one of the teams here in the Ocean Race Europe on leg 3 certainly has been very, very tricky indeed. So let's go back to Bureau Valet here because they are about to come across the finish line. And Abby, I think it's worth pointing out again that, as you were saying before, the podium, while the final positions on the scoreboard might still change, we know the 3 boats that are going to be on the podium, and sadly it's not going to be Bureau Valet and it is not going to be Coram. And in fact we might have time to have a little bit of a look at the scoreboard and just to confirm that to everybody before Bureau Valet comes to the finish line. So we'll have a quick look at the scores. So as you were saying, Abby, Offshore Team Germany linked out an 11th hour racing team. That's going to be our top 3 boats. Where each boat sits on the podium, that will be decided on the coastal race happening on Saturday. For Coram and Bureau Valet, no matter how well they perform in that coastal race, they cannot do any better than 4th. They could change position between each other, but they can't do any better than that. However, Abby, I mean, the thing is, the way that these IMOCA 60s are being sailed, multi-crewed, it isn't just about the victory or the number. I mean, this is a huge data gathering exercise. No matter how painful it might be to do it out in the water, you are pushing with multiple people on the boat, and that is giving you good numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very different setup to the initial design of the boat, which was more for the short-handed, you know, say single-handed or double-handed options. I think back to when I had the chance to do an Atlantic crossing with 11th Hour Racing. And we gave it a go with 5 crew just to see if it was physically possible to exist on board a boat like this. Needless to say, we did all survive, but it certainly wasn't pleasant. From the space environment down below, there's no bunks, you know, there's no toilet on board. It's just very, very simple, and you're literally on top of each other. You can see here from the cockpit setup, you know, if you try and fit more than sort of 2 people in there to do some work with halyards or lines, it suddenly becomes very busy. So it's just a difficult boat to operate on with many people, and even from that pit person looking out, you know, being able to see what's going on the bow, or being able to see what's happening on the boom if you're putting reefs in, it's really quite hard to do, and hence why a lot of them are wearing these headsets so that they can communicate easily to each other and safely in manoeuvres, and particularly at night time.
Yeah, the headsets are particularly interesting to me because we didn't see that on all of the boats. I think I only saw that on one of the boats at the beginning of the event. So I'm sure when the dust settles from the Ocean Race Europe and everyone has a chance to sort of rest and recoup, there'll be some very worthwhile debriefs and some changing in sailing styles. But just from the first start line to the coastal race on Saturday, our last chance to go racing, we've seen some big changes in the way that these boats have been sailed, and I'm sure we are missing loads as well as those little sort of subtle changes. I mean, when you know, with your history of the ocean race, I mean, how much do you change the way you sail as the miles tick down? Surely every day is a chance to realize, I should do it this way instead.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Every day is a learning day. Every day you're learning something new, and it might be a case of learning how not to do things. But it's always a progression forward, and I guess as over time you're just trying to refine everything that you do on board, and whether that's the mechanics of a manoeuvre, a peel, a sail change, whether it's a tack or a jibe, or you know, it's even down to the dagger boards, whether you're dropping one before you lift the other, or vice versa. You're really just trying to nail everything that you're doing on board down into a better place, and therefore you're saving time, you're going faster. This is just, you know, it's a new concept for this style of boat to be doing, you know, close haul starts and in a fleet race, and this kind of a shorter course racing. So yeah, it's very different, and first time that they've sailed the boats with crews, so lots of learning to be done.
And lots of patience required, not least in this situation right here, because Bureau Valet is, I mean, by my reckoning, they are, if they are not touching the line, they are only 1 or possibly 1.5 foot lengths away from the finish line, and the breeze has all but vanished. I'm just watching that code 0 at the top of your screen flapping around, and there's barely any shape to it at all. The main as well there, you can just see it banging against the main sheet. They are going downwind, so when it goes light, it goes light in the sails very quickly indeed, but it just looks like they are creeping forward, and they really are sort of seconds away from this start line, from the finish line, sorry. They are right there, and in fact I think that's a bit of a turn down to try and get through the finish line here on Genoa. That yellow flag you can see there, that's a lobster pot. That's not actually on the line, but there is the committee boat, and then to the left hand side of the screen, about to come into view, is a yellow mark. So they're probably only 2 boat lengths from this line, and the breeze has just vanished. And if you were sailing inshore, if you're used to doing sort of windward, leewards, dinghies or yachts, you might be thinking that the race would be abandoned, or at least something would change about it. But love it or hate it, this is one of the things that's actually, I think, pretty legitimate, shall we say, about offshore racing. Whatever the conditions, whatever happens, you've got to get from here and you've got to get to there. If the wind helps you, that's great. If it doesn't, you've got to deal with it. I mean, as a sailor who has to deal with that challenge, Abby, does that seem fair?
Well, sometimes not, and particularly not when you're effectively parked in this sort of position. I mean, it just feels terrible. But I mean, that's what makes an offshore sailor, is really being well-rounded and being able to cope with the extremes, be it this scenario where you've got very little wind and it can be hot and very uncomfortable for days at a time, compared with conditions that you might experience down in the Southern Ocean at the other end of the extreme, and how you cope with that situation. So yeah, I guess that's just part of the discipline, isn't it? Being able to cope with all of these situations, and yeah, push through.
Well, we are about to solve the question that's been long debated by sailors, which is, if you were able to blow on your sails, would you actually be able to propel the boat forward? Because that is just about the only breeze that is out there at the moment for Bureau Valet. They are maybe half a boat length, and every time I think that they are making progress towards the finish line, they just creep a little bit slower. That code 0 flapping around, barely anything in it. The main, again, not really providing anything. It's just sheer momentum that is taking this boat across the line. But the bowsprit has now broken the finish line. They are through. It is muted celebrations, but probably, Abby, I think the word that we're looking for here is relief.
Yeah, exactly. I think they'd be feeling really relieved that they've got across the line. It's a lovely time of day to be finishing. They can go ashore and enjoy some nice food and drink from the local town of Genoa. So I think they'll be extremely happy that this is over.
And what happens when you get in? Because obviously there's a lot of competitors and they might have betted you on the water, or they might have got a bit of luck that you think is unfair. When you do get in from a long offshore leg, is it to a certain extent sort of all forgotten, and it's just sort of sharing in that joy of being back on the shore again?
Yeah, I think it's such a special moment because everyone's had a different experience on the leg, and just being able to share with your competitors, you know, how it went for you, and a bit of a download of how it went for them. It's a really interesting time to be able to share, different routes, different things that happened on board, and I guess it's one way of learning about the boat, particularly amongst the one design class. But yeah, it's special because you've all been through the same journey yet have very different experiences. I guess it creates that great camaraderie between the teams.
And I think not so much in this fleet, but for the youngsters that have been featuring so much in the VO65s, quite nice to think that you've just been out on the race course, racing with these sailors, albeit maybe in a different class, but out on the same racetrack as people like Louis Berton and all the other big names, you know, Bauerbecking, all the legends that we know from offshore racing. So Bureau Valet is now through the line. Let's go to the tracker and just have a look and see how Corum's progress is being, because when we saw them before, I mean, painful is probably the word to use. They are now can't really affect too much about what they're going to get score-wise. There's no timeout procedure. There's nothing that will mean that they won't get that point. They are just waiting to try and get down. You know, 3 knots barely is pretty slow, but I guess one possible good thing is that they are moving in a straight line, Abby. I mean, if you're going to go slowly, at least you're being efficient with your slow going.
Yeah, exactly. That good old VMG, velocity made good, meaning that you're heading towards your ultimate goal, is certainly looking good on board Corum. So, yeah, but slow progress, and we're at that difficult time of day again, coming into evening, where we start to see the land cooling down, and whether that's going to mean the breeze will start to shut down before we get the land breeze building over the evening. But I really hope that, as you said, Corum are on a really good track at the moment, and let's hope that that breeze holds and gets them over the line soon.
Well, actually, I mean, we can be the bearer of some good news for fans of Corum. It's not going to improve their scores anyway, but it is going to lift a little bit of weight off their shoulders, because they are the final boat to finish, and there is the provision in the sailing instructions that because their position is basically fixed, there's no risk of them being timed out or anything like that. The race management team do have the authority to essentially finish them on the water. So Corum has now officially finished. So the race management team awarding Coram that final place. So with that, let's go to the points. Let's go to the overall scoreboard, because that does mean that all the IMOCA 60s have been awarded their places for leg 3. And so let's see what those points are. And as we were saying earlier, offshore team Germany, 14 points, linked out on 13, and 11th hour racing team on 12. And that's close enough between those three that either one can leapfrog the other, and we could get any one of those boats in the top spot. But they're all guaranteed at least a podium finish. For Coram and Bureau Vallée, now both of those boats have finished on 7 and 5 points apiece. They could still shuffle around a little bit between themselves, but sadly not for the podium. So that's it. That's our last boat coming across the line at the arrivals here for leg 3, the final leg of the Ocean Race Europe. Last chance to see the racing will be on Saturday for the coastal race. And if you were thinking that this was just a last little jaunt for the teams, do not be fooled. This will be the decider for the podium in the IMOCA 60 and the podium in the VO 65. A lot of places up for grabs and some scores to be settled. We're going to leave Bureau Vallée and Coram to make their way into the dock. We hope you've enjoyed being able to share those agonising moments for the sailors coming into the finish line, and we will see you all on Saturday.